part 2 of the Full and Bloom interview with drummer Bobby Rock. You can listen to more from this interview at fullandbloom.com. Click the link in the description. Subscribe to our channel if you'd like to be notified as new interviews and excerpts are uploaded. Do you recall meeting Vinnie and Dana for the first time?
Oh, yeah. Like I'm in the room with them right now, man. I just, as I'm walking in, the guy before me was just finishing up. It was just a cordial hello. It was Robert Fleischman, of course, who was the singer at the time.
Sure.
Vinnie and Dana. There was a couch that the three of them would sit down on, and what it was odd. We didn't jam. They didn't even bother to bring instruments. Or, their whole thing was like, let's just let every guy come in here for 5 or 10 minutes, let them play a few things, and then we'll narrow it down from there and see who we want to actually jam with, see who we would call. And that's what Dana explained. He says, you first come in and play 5-10 minutes, whatever, so we get a feel, and then we're going to get a few of our favorite guys to come back, and we're going to jam with them. Dana, he's never heard me play or anything, but he said, and I'm sure you're one of the guys who we'll bring back, because he realized that I could potentially be driving 1,500 miles for 5 or 10 minute audition and not be asked to come back, and I knew that risk also. So I knew basically I just had the one shot. I went in, and they were cordial, but a little chilly, not unkind, but just like, okay, here's another guy. It was going to all get down to what I was able to do in that 10 minutes. That's the way I was thinking about it.
And so they don't even see like a video
There was nothing like that, man. You didn't have the video thing, and
right.
Even like photos and shit like that. I guess they could have asked for a promo kit. That kind of was the introduction, at that 5 or 10 minutes. That was the way they looked at it. So that was it. Everybody's playing cold, going in cold. And they figure if you really sucked after 5 minutes, okay, thank you. And then the next person comes in. Technology wasn't, you could have sent a photo or something, but like video technology and that kind of thing was just a lot of people didn't even have VHS players then. It was just starting to become a thing.
Mikey Davis is engineering the album. Now I've searched all over for this guy. You have any idea where he's at?
I don't, man. I haven't heard in a number of years now. It's been quite a long time since I've heard from Mikey or heard what he's been up to.
How was it working with him?
It was cool. The VVI sessions, Dana Strum was always at the helm. He was the fire starter. He was the guy who went in and kind of had everything organized. And of course Mikey was there, and he was instrumental in doing what engineers do, putting mics, placing mics, getting sounds and all of that. But Dana Strum was largely the one who was actually pushing the record button.
Right.
For all those
and
things.
really the producer
Right. Technically speaking, it was a co-producer thing with him and Vinnie. Vinnie was right there with comments and all that, but it was actually Dana in the trenches, pushing the buttons, making the shit happen, influencing how things sounded, etc.
And would Dana also engineer? Does he know how to engineer?
He literally would. Yeah, he would literally. I don't know that he would twist a lot of knobs, but he was actually the one working the machine, meaning that if I was about to do a drum take, he's the one behind the controller, hitting the record button, hitting the stop button, hitting rewind and all of that. And the main reason for that is he was very well versed in and had a lot of talent at what we call punching in, punching out. So back then, you're dealing with 2-inch tape. There's none of this digital editing like we have now, Pro Tools and these kind of technologies where you're looking at a computer screen and you can take this little section from this take and cut and paste it into that take and all the things that go down, and you can quantize shit, meaning you can take something that's a little off the beat and fix it. There was nothing like that. It was, if you're going to fix something on a 2-inch tape, you had to hit the record button at the precise time you wanted the drummer, guitar player, or vocalist to do the thing that they're going to fix. But then you had to press stop to get out of it, or you had to, hit the record button again to get out of it, kind of like. So it was an art form to cut in and out because you're actually punching into a master take. And punching drums was especially difficult because you got cymbals, you got things that are ringing. It was challenging. He was highly skilled at it. Plus, he knew what he wanted. Mikey, I'm sure, could punch as well, but it was just easier for Dana just to sit down and do it. He was punching with Vinnie, with his rhythm parts, with the solos, with all that, and he was cutting into all kinds of, punching in and out of all kinds of nooks and crannies, and highly skilled. So he was the guy who was, therefore running the session. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, pick it up from the top of the second verse. I'll punch you in. Just keep on playing. I'll take you out. Yeah, that kind of thing. Very, very proactively running every facet of how the recordings were going down.
Is there something that beyond the punching in and stuff like that, is there something else that he kind of brings as a producer? as opposed to just being a musician also?
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, first, I think he has a big picture vision, very clear about that, what he wants the record to sound like and all of that. But in terms of his demeanor and his vibe, I've always found him to be like extremely diplomatic and sensitive, if you will, to, look, it's never easy with the red light, when the red light comes on and you're trying to get your most inspired performance and these kind of things. And so I would notice that he would be, and maybe that comes from him being a musician. He's been recorded a bunch and has also recorded a bunch of different musicians. So I think his thing would, just as one example, the sessions became very arduous. In terms of how we had to record and we were trying to I had to play with the machine and blah, 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 blah. And I think he understood that it was difficult and it was challenging. And a lot of it was just, I'd have to do multiple takes to get a certain thing right. And it was typically, he had to punch at the right place and I had to perform the right part. We had to have both those things happening. And I think just as one quick example for you, I think sometimes after the third or fourth try on something, maybe if I fucked it up like a third time or something like that, I might hear in the intercom in my headphone his voice, saying, "Hey Bobby, sorry man, one more time for me," which implied that I had played it right, that he had missed the punch. And chances are, his punch was probably fine, but I probably fucked up again. But that was one of the things that he might do to sort of keep me confident, instead of like, Bobby, you still pushed it, give us another one, that kind of thing. So that's just one example, but I think he was always sensitive about what was said. And Vinnie didn't necessarily have that sense of diplomacy. I don't think Vinnie was trying to be a prick. He might say, that sounded really amateurish, Bobby. You're all over the place with the click right now. Try it again. And that, and he would say it calmly, and that probably is what he really felt. But to tell a 22-year-old kid that, whose first major recording session, that's rough. Like, what? I sound amateurish. I can't play the, oh my God, you know what I mean? It was like that kind of thing. So I think Dana was careful about kind of buffering me from Vinnie's. He would have the intercom button off when Vinnie would give his feedback sometimes. And then he would say, try one more time, Bobby. Give it to us one more time. Just really focus on the kick and snare locking with he would give the diplomatic version of what Vinnie, like the translation,
right.
Of what Vinnie might say. And that made all the difference for me.
Beyond the introducing Randy Rhoads, the famous stories, and Jakey Lee to Ozzy and that kind of stuff, he's kind of known Sweet Savage. I mean, that was kind of what he was known for, is producing these and either selling them to the label or just developing them. Because really, I don't think he got anything out of Sweet Savage, in the end.
Right. I think it was probably a dice roll for him. I think at that time he was producing different bands who he liked, who he believed in, and who he thought had a chance to hit. And then look, if it hits, then he's along for the ride. I presume he probably had equity in the thing and probably had some kind of an agreement where if they got picked up by a major label, he'd need the guy to come in and produce and this kind of thing. For sure, man. You just got to admire his work ethic. He was always just grinding, man, in and around the main gig. And then even as he went on to do Slaughter and all those things, he was one of these kind of guys.
I had a friend that it was like a joke amongst us that my friend would go into pawn shops and he had like 100 Arbors and and he had every color, every variation, anything ever. So it was like this big joke, I'd always clown around with him about Arbor. And then one day I saw that and I called him and I'm like, you know what, man? I said, guess who has an endorsement with Arbor?
Of course, man.
I think he's the only guy ever. I think Dana Strum's the only guy ever that was endorsed by Arbor.
But he had back then the big thing was like the support. So he had like these big full page ads. Dana Strum, Vinnie Vincent Invasion plays Arbor. These big, beautiful ads, unlimited. So there was a method to the madness always. He figured everybody's playing Fenders and Rickies and whatever else, but who was playing Arbor? He could be the big fish in the small pond, and I think that's why he did it.
I came across this last night. Dana is the one who laid down the bass for, I Don't Know, Suicide Solution, and Crazy Train. Is that true? And he's uncredited?
I honestly don't know. I know that he was involved with Ozzy in the early days then, but I don't know the sequence of things. Very possible that he could have went in and done some of those early recordings. Whether those tracks wound up on something or somebody else's did, I really have no idea. He was definitely in that circle at that time.
So you guys are cutting this record. It's very much like a Mutt Lange, Def Leppard approach.
Precisely right. And I think I don't know how Mutt and those guys tracked, but that is exactly the vibe that Dana was going for, because back then Pyromania was like the gold standard of hard rock production. And so I think Dana's concept was, let's track all rhythm guitar and bass to a machine. So it's just lock it in with that machine. So there's just like this pristine metronomical ferocity, if you will, in the guitar and bass parts, just grinding together through all the tunes, just all locked into a machine. And then we'll have Bobby come in, replace the machine, but pay special attention to how he's playing and make sure he kind of replicates a lot of the machine-like aspects or elements. But then, Dana was thinking I'd also bring in a little bit of the rock, the human rock type feel. And so that was the concept. When you do drums last, there's just no way it's not going to be under a shit ton more scrutiny, because this is it. If one of the other parts were pushed or pulled at a certain place, you're going to hear it at that point. Whereas if a drum track, you listen to an isolated drum track, there could be a little push and pull. And then when the guitar player or bass player plays on top of it, they can compensate and, do it in reverse. That's how it usually is. So to your point, absolutely, man. It's that was kind of the idea back then, though, that it would follow Mutt Lange's kind of formula in terms of how Dana thought he could best get that kind of sound.
Also listening to it and then doing the drums at the end. I mean, your mind starts playing tricks on you after a while, and you start thinking you're hearing all kinds of shit that isn't necessarily there because you're just obsessing over.
It's so true, and I could tell you stories, and it was, that's exactly what happens. You think you're hearing it one way. I remember one time in particular, we were doing this thing where they were trying to manually fix kick and snare parts on a machine. Oh, Bobby snares off right there. Let's punch in on the machine a new snare and this kind of thing. Okay, cool, that's better. Let's go to the next. And we were doing it that way. And at one point, Vinnie heard something, a third snare right there is Rush. Let's fix it. And when they went back to record, and I don't even know who was pressing the button on the machine, it might have been the second engineer or something. And we punched. Actually, the second engineer was hitting the record button at the time, because what happened is, the machine didn't go into record, and instead what you heard was the unfixed snare drum, basically, because the guy missed the punch. And Vinny said, okay, cool, that's better, let's move on. And nobody said anything, because it's like he just heard the same thing 2 times in a row. First time he said it was pushed. This time here he said it was fixed and better. Let's move the fuck on. So to your point, that's how it gets in there sometimes. The recollection of, wait, is that pushed, or is that, wait a minute, is that right on the machine? And the thing is, it's ridiculous, because the listener's never going to hear it in that context. The drum track up against the machine side by side, and nobody's going to listen to it that way. So that was part of the ludicrousy of the whole thing.
Are you there while Vinny's laying down rhythm tracks?
Oh yeah, I was there the whole time, man. It was a great time.
Does any moment or any story, anything stand out?
Well, besides the fact that just how loud he recorded. And that's one of the things that always stood out to me, because I figured, okay, they're going to bring a Marshall stack into a studio and put a couple of mics up there, and that's it. They had this really elaborate thing in the studio where they had the amps, he had probably a half dozen different amps standing on their sides in like a semicircle with fan oscillating back and forth to keep the tubes cool. And then they had different cabinets kind of throughout the room and different configurations with different mics everywhere and all this crazy shit. And this was the first thing that was getting recorded, and they were just dropping it down on top of drum machines. And by the way, the sessions were always really calm and easy and cool. And I was just hanging out, because I wasn't going to be needed to record for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. And I was just digging, watching the process and listening to these monstrous tracks get recorded. And then one day I actually had to walk through that room. I forget what the reason was, but I actually had to be in there. I went in there to get something, or I don't know what the deal was, but then he started playing some rhythm track. It was like, holy fuck. You just could not imagine how loud it was in that room with all those amps blaring like that, man. And sure enough, when you listen to the track, the rhythm guitar's back and all that, you really zero in on it. You could hear the speakers being kind of just pushed to their absolute maximum, throwing out the maximum number of air at those cabinets. before he was just going to start blowing shit up, kind of like. And that was kind of part of the sound, that like borderline crackly sort of natural distortion, if you will, just from the shit being turned up so loud, you know? So that was kind of like my first couple of weeks, my memory of the thing, just listening to these killer ass tracks being dropped down on top of these drum machine parts.
And he's playing through several amps. Are they different amps or are they Marshalls?
As I recall, there were different ones. Some of them were like hot rodded. It was like some of them were his. I want to say they either rented or borrowed or whatever, different amps. And then I think based on where they would know on the board, okay, these two mics right here are on such and such cabinet, which is being powered by the Marshall. These two over here on this other cabinet. Yeah. So they kind of knew what was where, and they could do different combinations on the faders of what sound. That was the impression I got of what was going down. And some of the mics were further away from the cabinet, so you get more of the ambient sound in the room. I mean, it was all that kind of, every possible combination was available. Yeah, this was the overkill 80s.
Kind of the peak of,
yes.
86 was kind of that year where really right after that, Guns N' Roses came out in 87 and things started to trend in a different direction. But 86
True.
was like, that was the apex, you know, of that moment.
That's a good point. That's a good point in the timeline there. That's exactly right.
As you also had Poison and even the look of the band as well. Are the guys dressed like is Vinnie all glammed out in the studio?
He had kind of a modified version, but yes, you know, the skin tight jeans tucked into the boots and the big pink feather earring. But the clothing was a little more, I mean, he might have jeans instead of like that gold lame kind of shit, or he had his stage thing, which is way more over the top.
Of course.
But yeah, it was you know, and then the eyeliner, and you know, most of the time you just have regular, like this facial makeup on, fucking glittery eye type. I mean, it was, and you know what, man, back then I know now in retrospect it's hard to imagine, but you'd go to the fucking grocery store like that, man. It's just what it was back then.
All right. You know? A lot of guys wear eyeliner nowadays, but there was a period in the 80s where even like the breakdance dancer dudes, you know, would be wearing eyeliner, you know, and shit.
Right.
It was kind of a weird trend. But
right.
So, and then he's also, I mean, I'm not making fun or fucking with him at all. I mean, he had hair, and I know they wanted him to wear a wig on Lick It Up or suggested it, and he totally had hair. So I'm not making fun or pointing anything out or trying to belittle him in any way. But that was a wig, right?
I think that might be safe to say. Of course, I think the common rap was that he would spend a lot of time teasing up what he had and putting a crazy amount of hairspray in there and that kind of thing. And so I think that's what the word was, you know. But if you saw him off stage or at other time, the hair was, you know, kind of flat, you know. So that's why it was always kind of, I think, difficult to reconcile the two things. Like, how the fuck does he get that kind of hair? Of course, that's what we all did back then: tease our hair and spray the shit out of it. Because the idea was you wanted to kind of keep it big and high and wide for as long as you could, so you just lacquer that shit down.
Sure. And so on liner notes, it said no pedals, no outboard gear, no synthesizers. He didn't use any guitar pedals and really outboard gear. Surely you're using outboard gear in the studio. I don't even get what that means.
Well, I think what they were talking about is in terms of his guitar sound, like he wasn't... That
it was all natural or something?
Yeah, or he wasn't running his shit through an Echoplex or something like that. And I don't recall any actual pedals. I think that probably sprung up because there was a time when keyboards were just not cool to have on a rock record. I don't know if it was like new wave blowback or what the thing was, but it was a big thing to say no keyboard. I've seen several bands do it. No keyboards used anywhere on this record, or there'd be a picture of a keyboard with the circle in the line, you know what I mean, was a thing back then. And I think what they were trying to convey was like, this was just such a monstrous guitar sound from all these amps and all these cabinets that we didn't even need to cheat with pedal or whatever. That was I guess what the mentality was. But I don't, you know, by my recollection, in fact, was that he just plugged into all these amps and all that shit. But to your point, of course, when they went to go mix it, you can imagine they were probably running different tracks through all kinds of shit at that point. I don't know what they did, if they did much on the guitars, but that would be the opportunity opportunity to do it when you're mixing, you probably have whether any of a number of different things you can use in terms of outboard to influence the sound of something, So I don't know how true that would have been in post-production is what I'm trying to say.
Well, he's always had a cool tone. So,
yes.
And that's part of what makes, if you really look at the guitar heroes, it's like part of it is, it's their amazing talent, but part of it is obviously they spent so much fucking time fucking with the amp or whatever to get that sound. And it really is.
True.
You look at Michael Schenker or, I mean, Eddie Van Halen. Of course, I mean, these are great people, Yngwie, but it's like, it's also this level of tone. And Vinnie, when I listen to those records, there's a beautiful tone.
Yes, it was, man.
Tone.